Good morning. We're ready?
The stream.
Okay.
Do you guys know how to put your district by your name? Christina?
You're on mute, Christina. There you go.
Sorry, I do, Brent. I just have to get it
Okay.
done is all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
And Board Member Davis, if you could put your district number by your name, that would be greatly appreciated. Okay. Well, good morning. It was a short night for most of us last night, and here we are back, ready for more wonderful finance. At the request of staff, we are going to make some slight modifications to your agenda for today. We're going to start off with what is denoted on your agenda as item 1.6. It's an information item. It's teacher and student success account, SFY 2023 funding update. And for that, we will turn the time over to Ben Rasmussen.
Chair, may I have a point of information?
Yeah.
So you said action item 6. Did I hear that correctly?
1.6, it's an information item.
Chair, the schedule has been updated, so this is actually 1.1 now.
Oh, yours is updated now. Great. Okay. I printed it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you, Mr. Rasmussen. I appreciate that as well.
Okay.
And Chair, I have the rule associated with this, so I have 1.2, but I don't have the update. That would be Dale or Deborah. I'm not sure who's doing that.
Okay.
If we can turn the time over to Director Yuri.
That would be great. Okay, Director Yuri, you can take it.
And I'd actually like to recognize our MSP Administrator, Del Frost, to
Okay,
present on this item as well.
great. Thank you, Mr. Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Can we, I don't know who's driving. Is that Ben or Cami?
It's Cami.
Okay, Cami, will you click on that link, the TSSA distributions? I'll go into more detail in the next item as to the why of this, but these are just the results. If you remember last month, we brought to you the findings of internal audit, who we worked with to determine the extent of under or overpayments for TSSA distributions from 2020 through 2022, and needed to find one-time resources to hold the LEAs harmless. For 23, we can simply adjust allocations, and these are the adjustments. We just wanted to show that to you as an information item. If you can, so the first two charters, the reason why they had a big change is, I'll go into that more, but there was an adjustment down from their projected to their actual enrollments. And so those are bigger than other LEAs. If you can scroll down, Cami, just to show the impacts for, other than those two special cases for LEAs, is more in, you know, the plus or minus 5% range. And can you scroll to the bottom, Cami? Again, so what this is, the only change was allocating TSSA allocations based on budget request LEA WPUs instead of legislative estimate WPUs. And as I said in the next presentation, I'll go into why those are different. The only on the positive side, Career Academy of Utah, that was a new charter that wasn't included in the legislative estimates as our business practices, but as we went back to adjust that, they were included on the budget request. So that was the other big adjustment for an LEA. I don't know if there are questions, but we've already made these adjustments and communicated this to LEAs. They have been very patient with us as we've come to what right is. And as we try, as we've had to update budgets and allocations, and are looking forward to not having, changing our business practices so that this doesn't happen again going forward. And with that, I'd answer any questions, Chair.
Thank you. I see a question from Committee Member Bogus.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Mr. Yuri, or no, Mr. Frost, I apologize. You seem to, and maybe this is just me reading the agenda memo and drawing an unfounded conclusion, but you seem to use the words TSSA allocation and WPU interchangeably. Did I mishear you, or could you maybe explain that to me so I can better understand?
Chair, may I respond?
You bet. Thank you.
Member Bogus, the reason why they aren't interchangeable, these are not the WPU allocations. The reason why we mention WPUs is because the formula to allocate out TSSA allocations depends upon each LEA's proportional share of WPUs. And it's just a metric to and there are a number of programs in the Related to Basic that do this. And so yeah, when we talk about how WPUs change, that affects the TSSA allocations. Does that answer your question?
It does, sir. Thank you. I appreciate you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, this was just an information item. So now we can move to the next item on our agenda, which is a companion with the actual action item. Are we
So-
starting with Sam or Dale on that?
I can start on this one, Chair.
Oh, there we go with Ben. Thank you.
So staff asked us to basically what you've got in this amendment are some technical edits, but the primary change starts about line 75. Cami, if you want to go to there, and it basically describes the amendments basically describe what will happen with funding for new LEAs or charter school satellite campuses, and so that's the primary change. Like I said, there's some other technical changes throughout the rule, but I think that's where your primary change is, and I think Dale Frost would speak to the reason for that.
Hey, Dale, would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, before we move to the presentation, can we also on line 63 and 64, Ben, do you want me to explain that change? Or
If you'd like, I thought it was just a technical change, but yeah, you're welcome.
I think you could argue that it is a technical change, but I just wanted to highlight that as you read the internal audit memo, there was a question on whether or not following this November 1 deadline affected allocations, and Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones could speak more to this, but for a whole number of factors, this has never been enforced. So we're just trying to align with current practice on that. And as long as an LEA gets their framework and or assurances in, TSSA allocations will flow. And that's been the practice. We just wanted, I don't know if that's technical or not. I just wanted to highlight that issue. So just so you're all aware. But as Ben mentioned, yeah, the big changes are probably the biggest changes on line 72 and 73, where current and budget requests are stricken to prior year WPUs. And so that's kind of the key change. And we're providing, we'll go through kind of the logic that we went through as staff to recommend this change. There are a few different approaches, and there are pros and cons to which WPUs you refer to in the TSSA allocations, and why we're recommending using prior year WPUs rather than current year budget request WPUs. And Just a bit of context, the reason why this error was made is this is the only program that I'm aware of in the entire MSP that for all LEAs, we base final distributions on projected numbers. There are some special case scenarios for new charters here and there, but for everybody, this is the only case where WPUs really mean something different than what we tend to use almost anywhere else. So one of the points I've made to LEAs multiple times throughout this conversation is, in my opinion, that projections should be a means to an end and not an end unto themselves. Most LEAs don't want to wait until we have all the final data. Can you imagine LEAs trying to operate with no funds from July through November? So but we have to wait until we have the October 1 counts and we have the prior year ADM counts, which come in October, to base final WPU calculations on. And so before then, we have to use projections. But then we true that up to actual students for every other program for all LEAs except for this one. And this was those two words, current year budget request, are what really started this whole issue a few months ago. So if we can go, Cami, can you go to the presentation? I'll just spend a few minutes going over this. Happy to answer any questions that you have throughout or at the end, whatever you'd prefer, board members. So it's the Comparing TSSA Distribution Methodologies link right there. Okay, so if we can scroll to the next slide. So here is the language in statute. And so this is the methodology that needs to be used to allocate TSSA allocations, which is the percentage of WPUs compared to the total number of WPUs in the state. So if you are 1% of the total WPUs, you get 1% of TSSA funds. The question is, in statute, WPUs, it does not have a different, in this section, they do not define WPUs differently. So how is the term WPU defined? So next slide, in statute. So this is the definition. So means the unit of measure of factors that is computed accordance with this chapter. So basically, there's not a single, so it basically refers to the formulas that affect how WPUs are calculated for all of the basic school programs. Next slide. And so there's this whole host of sections, and they affect all the different programs. So the calculation for K-12 versus foreign exchange versus professional staff, they all have their different calculations. WPU, the value of it is the same across all. And so, but it's not like, how can I phrase this? It basically just means that unit that is calculated according to these formulas. But in practice, what we mean by WPUs at the end of the day is we use projections, and then we true those up to actuals when we have the data. All right, next slide. So with the MSP process, there are kind of 4 different steps. So budget requests, as you saw, was in the original rule. This is a report that isn't provided to LEAs, not because we don't want to provide them this information, but it's really it's a step in the process. What we go through the Common Data Committee process to help the legislature determine the cost to the basic school program that go into the base budget. And we don't know things like the WPU value and these sort of things. So we calculate WPUs to help the legislature, but it doesn't actually help LEAs know what their funding is going to be at the end of the day. And so the 3 kind of reports that go out to LEAs are those next 3, the legislative estimates, the mid-year updates, and the final updates. So legislative estimates, we make these calculations after the session is done based on projections. So we tell LEAs, you know, $100 million was allocated to the kindergarten program based on your projected data. Alpine School District, we estimate you're going to receive this amount of funds, and that's what's loaded into their budgets. And then when we get actual kindergarten prior year ADM and October 1 counts, we true up those counts in the mid-year updates, and that's in November. So we went through this, and that's why we updated TSSA allocations, where this was pointed out that we shouldn't have done that with TSSA back in November, and that's what started this whole process. The final updates doesn't affect WPUs. In what it does affect, we're truing up to actual property tax collections because that affects state allocations to school districts and certain programs. So next slide. This is just a way to show it kind of during the calendar year. I think next slide will, can you go to the next slide, Cami? Yeah. All right. So this just kind of shows you visually that process. So for this current year, back in November, December of 2021, I apologize, it should be in October and November. That's when we made those calculations that for the budget request WPUs on which the TSSA allocations are based. That was the calculation from the first item. Then when the legislator set the WPU value of 4038 in the session, that's when we calculated the legislative estimates, sent that out to all of the LEAs. And then just this last, and again, I don't know why we put the mid-year update. Maybe it's because I adjusted things. That mid-year update occurs in October, November. That's when we trued up to actuals. So I just wanted to show you that the first two parts of this process are based on projections, and the second two parts are based on actuals. That's the key part of this visual. Next slide. So this now goes to the rule, where the rule, this is the part that I missed, that WPUs has this very specific requirement for TSSA. That proportional requirement for the TSSA allocation is not based on WPUs as we true those things up to actuals. It's based on that current year budget request, that first calculation. And that is what caused the differences for that 2020 through 2022 levels, as well as 2023. I hope that makes sense. There's a lot of parts and pieces to this. Next slide. And yeah, that's what drove, you know, the allocation changes between for 2023. One of the questions I had was, in theory, for most programs, the WPUs don't change between the budget requests and legislative estimates. The value of those WPUs changes. So why did the WPUs change in the budget from the budget request to legislative estimates? So I went through that program by program. Next slide. Oh, next slide. I already covered that. Thank you. So I went through program by program in the basic school program and compared the budget request WPUs to the legislative estimates WPUs. So for these programs that are highlighted, so kindergarten grades 1 through 12, foreign exchange, NEST, pro staff, special ed, self-contained. So these programs are the majority of the WPUs. They match exactly. There's no change. And this was my understanding. But what I didn't realize is that for some of these other programs, there were changes. Next slide. So let me just give you a couple examples. And then the story started to make sense as I went through this. Let's take the special ed add-on, for example. Back in November of 2021, we hadn't gone through the session yet. If you remember, in last session, House Bill 113 changed the special ed add-on formula, adding more WPUs to that. Well, we didn't account for that because that hadn't occurred yet. And that was accounted for in the legislative estimates. The same thing occurred with the at-risk WPU add-on. And so there's a general problem with using the budget request WPUs that we don't account for any changes to WPUs that they make in the legislative session. Then these three programs, special ed self-contained, special ed preschool, special ed extended year, not self-contained, excuse me, that's it. I put notes on each of those. That's that little like purple triangle at the beginning. Preschool, extended year, impact aid. Those I've realized are actually based on December 1 counts, which we don't have in October, November. And we true those things up. So those are actual data points. We use prior year data until we have the data. So those will not match either. And then CT add-on, those didn't match, but I don't do those calculations and I didn't have a chance to go through all the reasons. And there are a lot of programs within CT add-on. I'd have to go and look into that one in more detail. But the class size reduction, I wanted to point this one out. This program is unique in that, unlike most of the programs where there is a set number of WPUs and that calculates your dollar figure, the way the formula works for class size reduction is it says, takes the total appropriation, look at your pro rata share of K through 8 enrollments, back into that, and then you calculate the number of WPUs. And so if you remember, the main data point that changes between the budget requests and legislative estimates is the WPU value. If the WPU value changes, which it does, the WPUs for this program changes. So between those two kind of milestones, class size reduction will never match. Now, I know that's a lot of detail here. The point I went through this, it was kind of painstaking process for me to understand what was going on, but I just wanted you to understand that there are challenges to using the budget request WPUs versus legislative estimates. And okay, let's go to the next slide. So this was the main one I wanted to go over with you. So why was the budget request WPUs used in the first place? When I talked to Jamie Barrett, who now works for Jordan School District, she brought up the wording in this. She made the point, which is true, that was intentional so that allocations did not change during the year. TSSA allocations, flow to the districts, but then are allocated to the schools. School councils actually use those funds. So if you change those allocations throughout the year, you cause a lot of administrative burden through the year, right? But I kind of explained why the difference between budget requests and legislative estimates. So in both cases, the allocations are stable, meaning that if you base it on those WPU calculations, they wouldn't change throughout the year. The problem is for both of those is because they're based on projections, they do not reflect actual students. Let's say you are an LEA that has 10,000 students. Well, we think you're going to have 10,000 students. Let's say you end up having 9,900 students. Well, if you don't change those, you're actually getting funded in TSSA based on 100 students who didn't materialize. Does that make sense? And the opposite is true too. Let's say that you had 10,000 students and then you actually had more growth than we had projected. And in October 1, now you have 10,100 students. For those allocations, if you base it on either budget request or legislative estimate WPUs, you are not accounting for those 100 students. But the big difference between budget requests and legislative estimates is that it doesn't reflect legislative changes, as I had mentioned to you. Also, the term legislative estimates is not defined in rule. We would just need to do that if we went with those approaches. So my default was this third approach, which is the mid-year update. That is where once we get current year numbers, we update allocations. So then you don't have the problem of funding students who are not there or funding or not funding students who are there, but you cause, and this is, I knew what so that's the good thing, the pro. On the con side, you're causing a lot of administrative burdens because they have to go to all of the school allocations and make those adjustments. Talking to Salt Lake School District, for example, they didn't make their schools make those changes, but the district part of that allocation, they just ate that. And so that's why I think it was important to, because the rule is very specific, to hold LEAs harmless to that change until we can make a change for the next years. So this goes to the final column here. And this is why I think the best approach going forward, so that we never have this problem again, is to go with prior year WPUs. So if next year we allocate TSSA allocations based on the final WPUs that we've already calculated, allocations will be stable. They will reflect actual changes and legislative changes. The drawback is, just to be transparent to you all, is that your allocations are based on prior year students. And so growing LEAs would have to wait a year for that growth to be reflected. There's no perfect option here. You're either going to be inaccurate, add administrative burden, or be behind, basically out of sync by a year. In my opinion, I think the prior year WPUs is probably the right way to land, but that's why we wanted to be very transparent to you all that these are the different approaches for distribution methodologies. They're all based on WPUs. It's just when those WPUs are calculated. I hope that makes sense. And so if we just say current year WPUs and don't specify when that calculation is, it would opt to that third column. If we say prior year WPUs, it would opt to the mid-year update calculation from the prior year. And then if we want to go with the current language or the legislative estimates, we would just need to define that clearly in rule. So those are the four options for you. In the rule as you have it, the draft right now, it's that fourth column again. Okay, if we can go to the next slide.
Could we
Yes.
wait for just a second and answer a couple of questions?
Oh, yes. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, looks like we've got Vice Chair Davis and then, never mind. Okay, and Chair Moss.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. I just want to make sure I'm clear. We don't need to change anything in code to change this disbursement model. It would only be needed to be changed in rule. Also, we saw changes to charters. Did we have a table that was changes to districts? Was that when I ran out to get my water? I can go back and look at it again if I just missed it.
Chair, may I answer that?
Yeah,
So the list that you saw in that first information item includes both districts and charters. And it's
Oh, it did.
organized by the percent change, it doesn't have districts and charters broken out. So you'll see if you look at
Got
that
it.
list that districts are in there.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And then how do we know how much growing districts are going to be impacted? I mean, what is the hit boil down to in dollars? Or can we not estimate that right now?
Chair, may I answer that question?
Yeah.
So it depends based on remember that the WPUs are calculated on a whole set of formulas. So it really depends by formula. And the point I would make is that the nice part about using either the mid-year update from the current year or the prior year is that there's no dollar loss, in the sense that you reflect actual students at the end of the day. It's just, was it actual students this year or actual students last year? And if you base it on projections, that's where you can miss things. We do our level best to make projections as accurate as possible, but there's no way to know exactly down to the student what every LEA will receive, what will happen at the end of the day. And so so it's relatively minor, but basically my point is that if if you saw significant growth this year and it's based on prior year WPUs, you wouldn't see that in your TSSA allocations this year, but you would next year. So there's, you know, if you're looking over a longer period of time than just 1 year, there's no loss there. It just, you know, so those who saw growth this year, if we make this change, won't see that growth next year because it will be based on this year's WPUs. But the following year, it would be reflected in their TSSA allocations. Does that help? Board Member Davis?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Chair Moss?
you.
Just quick question, Dale. The chart I'm looking at compares the budget request and legislative estimates. I think that's the one we flipped through, right? It had 8% down to some others. When we're looking at, and I know this is, we've seen this elsewhere, but what kind of variation are we looking at from prior year WPU to following year? I know there was a lot of fluctuation during the last year or two, but what kind of swings are we looking at the extremes, and what's kind of the general, amount of variation? And I don't mean to get scientific or hold you to this. I'm just curious, what is that delta, right? Because like you said, it all ultimately is based on actual students. And I was on community council. It's great to have that money. It's not your core, coverage like a WPU. It's this wonderful extra pot. And so a little bit of fluctuation there is not a bad thing in exchange for certainty, in my view, which is kind of what you've outlined. But can you just remind us what the fluctuation is generally?
Chair, may I answer Chair Moss's question?
Great, thank you.
So Chair Moss, I would probably refer you back. Do you remember when we went over the mid-year update changes? That basically answers your question there. Depending on if there are significant changes in enrollments, you can see that. So there were cases, especially on the charter side, where you had a 20% change in enrollments and could see a 20% change in your WPUs. For the larger districts, just because of size, you don't see that. And the delta is more like 1 or 2%, if that's helpful. And it's really driven by students and where they actually land in the comparison. If we are right on, then you would see from our projections to actuals, then you would see no change. But when we're off is where you see that. And then the other question or answer I would have, we tend to be most off for charters that are opening a new satellite campus or are opening brand new. Because those are the hardest to really know how many students are really going to be there. They have their projections, but having been on the charter board, it's really hard to know how many students come in at the end of the day. Sure. And so if you look at the rule, we still have that true up for charters that are new or open a new satellite campus, which right. is, and that's, let me give you an example. So Career Academy of Utah is getting 100,000. We estimated that they were going to have 500 students. They ended up having 64. And so next year, their allocation, and we told them this, will be probably zero. It would be, they're not going to go negative, but it would be whatever change you have in your enrollment, you would be allocated down to zero. So we told them, hey, you're getting this large pot of money this year, very likely next year, depending on what is done, you're not going to get any TSSA allocations next year. So make sure that can, hold you over for that year until we get to the following year. And so that's probably the most extreme example of an 80% drop, but that was because we were so far off where they were projections to actuals.
Right. A quick follow-up.
Yes, sir.
And again, just to be a little more precise, but not expecting a scientific answer, what proportion or what portion of districts and charters generally would you say experience more than, say, a 10% swing? I'm just curious what share of those are these outliers where it'll have a more than 10% effect? Any general sense for that?
Chair, if I may, I would be shocked if it's more than 5%. It's probably 2 or 3%.
Got it. Okay. That helps. I mean, that's the trade-off, right? We're trading off some uncertainty for more precision with a little bit of a swing, but got it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for taking those questions. You want to continue on, Mr. Frost?
Okay.
Chair, I have
Does-
just one quick question, if
yeah.
that's okay.
Go ahead. Yes, thank you. Didn't see that.
No, I apologize. A little follow-up, I think, to Chair Moss's question. And that is, I represent a great chunk of the Jordan district, and they are growing in massive ways. And I might be talking more about Cindy's, member Davis's area, but my crude math tells me this is a big number for these districts experiencing massive growth. Could you quantify that for me so that I can better understand how that would specifically impact the Jordan district, who's growing? Sometimes I think they grew by like 10,000 students one year.
Chair, may I answer? Board Member Bogus?
Yes.
Board Member Bogus, I will look at the delta changes for Jordan over the last couple of years and look at their TSSA allocation. I can tell you, more or less what that would be. I just need to look at that for a second.
I would appreciate that. Maybe today is not the time. That's the first thing that came to my mind. Thank you.
Okay, and it looks like Deborah Jacobson has her hand up. Thanks. So go ahead.
I'm just wondering, just in the interest of time, Del, are we getting close to Ben has a lot on his plate today and
Yeah.
he's got to get to the other committee.
Yeah, Superintendent Jacobson, yeah, this was the main slide I wanted to go over. I know it's just important, but this was the main point I wanted to make on the trade-offs here. I think, let's go to the last few slides. I can wrap up really quickly. That's why I selected that one for the rule change. These are our this is our contact information. I will try to answer Board Member Bogus's question via email or in the chat. And that concludes my presentation, Chair.
Great, thank you. All right. Superintendent Jacobson, did you have another follow-up question?
Oh, no, sorry, I forgot to take my
Okay.
hint then.
No problem. Okay, seeing no other questions, I think that we are ready for the action item. The recommended action, the motion. Oh, go ahead, Sam.
Just a quick note, if we look at Jordan School District's enrollment, they have actually tailed off just a little bit recently. And we are projecting negative growth for them. So it's very minor, it's about 1%, but in October of 21, they were at 57,840. They lost just 11 students the next year. And then maybe looking at the wrong column here, but so at least currently Jordan School District isn't growing rapidly. And we do it through the CDC process. I wanted to make a point of we do look at all the births compared to graduating seniors and projections county by county. And so, especially for the large districts, we're really not looking at a big delta change. And again, Dell's done a good job of emphasizing the pros and cons of this approach, but this approach, at the end of the day, funds real students that were in the district. And so that's why we're recommending this approach. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Sam.
Okay, Vice Chair Davis.
I'll let someone else make the motion, but I'm gonna vote for it today. Well, maybe I'll just wait till we get a motion on the floor.
Okay, I'll go ahead and place that motion. I move that the committee approve R277-927 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. You wanted to speak to that?
Yeah, I'll speak to the motion. I'm gonna vote for this today, but I do think it would be good to hear from whatever those LEAs are that might experience more significant swings or growth. I know that may be more of our charters, and I'm not sure where we are as far as growth with our smaller rural schools. So I just want to say publicly, I'm open to feedback until we get to the full board meeting and may revisit it to a different idea then. But this seems like, for all intents and purposes, the wisest move as of right now with all the information that we have currently.
And Board Member Bogus, I see you. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to respond to Vice Chair Davis. The way I see it, it's actually could be advantageous to them, because rather than it being based on a prediction and then, oops, we have a big change coming up, they don't even know it, and then it got changed. This way, they're going to say, okay, we're here and we know that, our money next year is based on this year's amount, and we know what this year's amount is it's going to be. So I think it looks to me, and I could be wrong, Sam or Dale, but seems to me that they're going into it. They're living those actual numbers. They know what they are, so they know what next year's is going to be. So I looked at it as a positive note for them.
Just quick follow-up to that,
Yeah.
Chair. I totally agree. I think administratively, this will be much easier. We keep getting the messages, like with trust lands and everything else. Spend your money on this year's students, spend this year's money students on this year's students. So I've got that rolling around in my brain too, and just trying to make sense of the whole.
Yeah.
But I am going to vote for this today.
Chair, if I may respond to your comment, you are correct. If let's just take Alpine School District. If we assumed, I think we have 1% growth or something like that planned for this next year. Let's say they had 2% growth. Based on the current formula, that additional 1%, would never get funded for Alpine School District for that year. And then it gets, with this change, they would just have to wait a year, and then that extra 1% would be funded. And so in that case, that's the nice part about not basing it on projections, and why I had real concern with the way the rule was written, as such that we don't want to fund based on students who don't materialize or do materialize and aren't funded. We can, to your point, Board Member Davis, base it on current year WPUs. The drawback is that makes everybody in the system revise all their budgets, and it adds administrative burden. And so that's which do you prefer as policymakers? There's no perfect solution.
Right, but 1% of 87,000 kids, you're looking at 1,000 kids funding. So it's in real numbers, things to weigh out. But I agree with you 100% and think we should move forward on this today.
Great. Board Member Bogus.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, as I read this, I'm seeing what appears to be, though it could not be, on line 71, some inconsistent language. And I just wanted to clarify. So, for example, in line 71, it says for an existing LEA, and that seems to encompass all of what has been struck. But then later on, they're separated again. So in line 75, for a new LEA or charter school, I'm just wondering if we shouldn't clean up that language. Like, are they separate? Are they together? I don't know. Maybe my question doesn't make sense. I just am.
Chair,
Yes,
I
go
think
ahead.
I can respond to that. So so subparagraph 4 there has 2 definitions in it. So WPBU for an existing LEA is A, And then B, which starts on 75, is for the new LEA or satellite camp or charter school opening a new satellite campus. So I think that they should be different. They shouldn't be consistent, I think is the answer to your question, Member Bogus.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, seeing no other hands, board members, if you'll please use the reaction down at the bottom of your screen and vote. I don't see board member Straight's vote.
He's a yes.
Okay, great. So it looks like that passes unanimously.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Sorry to keep you. All right, so our next item on our agenda is public comment. Did we get any public comment in, Cami?
We do not have any public comment.
All right, so moving along, it looks like we'll go to our next action item, which is agenda item number 4, the Medicaid billing system.
Good morning, Chair. Assistant
Good
Superintendent.
morning, Leah.
Good morning. Nice and early. Assistant Superintendent Leah Voorhees. I am bringing a recommendation forward that we're excited to share with you today. The State Board of Education staff and LEA staff and the Medicaid administration staff at the Department of Health have been working together for the past year or so to really make Medicaid, school-based Medicaid services billing processes simpler, more coherent, and more consistent across the state. And we have been meeting very regularly, the 3 groups, to try to improve our school-based Medicaid billing system. Sorry, Chair, did you have a question?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm just
Okay.
in line for a question.
So one of the things that we have identified that would make the school-based Medicaid program run smoother is if we had a consistent billing system across the state. Currently, our districts and one of our larger charter schools, and we have another charter school who is working on billing Medicaid, they contract with providers to bill Medicaid. So they do the work. They have a system that sends the data to the Department of Health in order to bill the Department of Health for their school-based Medicaid services. They pay for those contractors, and there are various different contractors. They don't all use the same one. They pay a percentage of the fees that they bill to that contractor. The Department of Health has on staff, as a result of American Rescue Plan COVID-19 funds, has on staff a group of programmers who had created a system based on the COVID pandemic that they needed, and has finished their work. So these IT programmers have finished their work, but the money, the federal American Rescue Plan money, has not run out yet. And the Medicaid team, the administration team at the Department of Health, has determined that if it is agreeable to you as the board, that they could continue to use American Rescue Plan funds, have the IT programmers create a statewide Medicaid billing system for the school-based mental health or school-based Medicaid program, so that all districts and any charter schools who are interested in billing Medicaid would be able to significantly reduce their costs in billing Medicaid, and hopefully more charter schools in our state would then be interested in participating in the school-based Medicaid program. And the districts who are currently participating in the school-based Medicaid program would be able to choose if they wanted to continue their contract or if they wanted to end those contracts and use the Medicaid billing system that the Department of Health would create. So what would happen if you approve this opportunity? The programmers would create the system and then transfer the system to us. We at the State Board of Education would then take over the maintenance of the system, and we would need to have either one of their IAT specialists come here, or our RT team would need to hire someone to maintain that specialist. And for the cost of a salary, we would be able to provide that service to all the districts and any charter schools, the one who is currently billing and the one who is trying to, and any others who are interested to participate. So it would be a very minimal fee that we would charge them to be able to divide up that salary every year for them to participate. It would significantly reduce their costs, and hopefully it would significantly increase the number of LEAs that participate in the school-based Medicaid program. So the Medicaid administration has already discussed this with the appropriation committee, who is responsible for our state Medicaid plan, and they are supportive. And so we are now bringing this to you for your consideration, and I am open to questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Committee Member Bogus, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Superintendent Voorhees, I have just a few questions. Could you give me some examples of school-based Medicaid services?
Chair, would you like me to respond?
I would, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Member Bogus. So the majority of school-based Medicaid services are nursing related services, or personal care services. So students that have significant health issues, students that have multiple disabilities who either require on-site nursing, who require nurses that check in with them, who require individuals who change their trachs and clean their trachs. Other school-based mental health service, or not mental health, excuse me, other school-based Medicaid services include mental health services, some that social workers or school psychologists provide, some services such as occupational therapy. There are some services that are eligible for billing of Medicaid. The majority are personal care and nursing services, but there are some mental health services and some other services that you might find on a student's IEP that are eligible according to our Medicaid state plan. Does that answer your question, Member Bogus?
It does. I have a small follow-up, Chair.
You bet.
Thank you so much. So this does help a lot. We're not talking about like a CLC thing in every school and doctors in buildings and things like that. We're talking more about IEPs and the services needed as a part of that. Okay, I wanted to be clear about that.
Yeah.
So you brought up mental health, and which actually what spurred my follow-up question. Actually, I'm going to withhold that question. I apologize. Thank you.
Okay. My question again has to do with the cost as well. You mentioned a minimal cost of maintaining it with a FTE. Would USBE be responsible for any of the cost of the development?
No, American Rescue Plan funds would pay for the development. Thank you for asking that question so I could clarify. So the Department of Health would take on the development. USBE would be taking on the maintenance.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Vice Chair Davis. You're muted.
Can you put the motion on the screen? I cannot make this motion fast enough. Just let me do it. I move that the Utah State Board of Education Finance Committee recommends that the Utah State Board of Education approve Utah State Board of Education staff to work and coordinate with the Utah Department of Health to develop, test, and implement a Medicaid billing system for use by districts and/or charter schools. And that once the system is fully operational, the Utah State Board of Education staff transition the system to oversight and control by the Utah State Board of Education staff. And I'd like to speak to the motion.
That would be wonderful. Go ahead.
Medicaid billing is a behemoth. It is, we are paying people so much money to navigate the ins and outs of Medicaid billing. And if something like this would help reduce that burden on our LEAs, but also to give more opportunities for our most vulnerable students to have a wider range of educational options and experiences. I am all for it. I do want to add one caveat that on public record, I am saying it sounds almost too good to be true. And it will all hinge down on that one line in the statement we were just reading, that if properly developed, the cost won't be too great to USBE. And I just want to make that very clear publicly that really, I mean, this would have to be properly developed. Otherwise, it could potentially be a nightmare. But I think the risk is worth taking because the benefit, if it is properly developed, would be absolutely huge for our LEAs and also for our students that benefit from more LEAs being able to serve them and receive funding for those really intricate, often services.
Great. All right. Any discussion? Go ahead, Member Bogus.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question is directed to Superintendent, I don't see her picture. Oh, Voorhees. Ms. Voorhees, will districts or LEAs have to, and I quoted it in my writing, will they have to change staff in any way to bill this out? I know that our districts are very good about making sure that the people in these roles that are serving these kids are qualified and that they have the appropriate credentials and certifications, but Medicaid can be very sticky, very, very sticky. And as we've been talking, I'm wondering if some of the instances where, quote, money is left on the table, if you will, if that could be because Medicaid's just too sticky. And we have my concern is, are our districts going to have to change out people in order to use this and bill it out and gain access to that money because of all the tentacles and the stickiness? I don't know of another word. Sorry, that's so whatever of the Medicaid system. Thank you. That's my question.
Should I respond, Chair?
You bet. Go ahead.
Thank you for that question. No. So the simple answer is no, that the system will simply be to make the billing, once the service has happened in the district or charter school, get to Medicaid in a format that Medicaid can say, oh yes, we accept that and we will pay you for it. Your point, however, about the licensure, the certification, having the exact person with the right credentials that could be billed for their service is an important point. And that is sticky, to use your word, and it is complicated. And in fact, yesterday and today I had 5 already. Today I've had 1, but yesterday I had 4 communications with Medicaid staff about that exact issue. It is complicated. and we are working on that with LEAs and with Medicaid administration, but the system would not be, it wouldn't affect the providers. The providers would not affect the system that we're talking about. The provider issue is definitely an issue, but it isn't related to the billing system.
Okay, thank you. I may have a follow-up, Chair, but I'm with Member Davis. I would support this motion and moving this to the board and having spirited discourse and debate there. Thank you.
Okay, and so to clarify, we can go ahead. Your questions are answered for now. There may be some later. Is that right? Okay. All right, so seeing no other hands, the motion on the floor is that the Utah State Board of Education Finance Committee recommends that the Utah State Board of Education approve the Utah State Board of Education staff to work and coordinate with the Utah Department of Health to develop, test, and implement a Medicaid billing system for use by districts and/or charter schools, and that once the system is fully operational, the Utah State Board of Education staff transition the system to oversight and control by Utah State Board of Education staff. Board members, go ahead and please vote. Okay, Cami, can you see votes by Chair Moss and Board Member Straight?
I can. It passed unanimously.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, committee, for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your presentation. All right, next up, we have another action item. It's the Utah Data Research Center agenda policy priority. And who will be running that show?
Chair, if we can recognize Director Bruff.
You bet. Thank you. Director Bruff, welcome.
Good morning, Aaron Bruff, the Director of Data and Statistics. Thank you for this time. Cami, do you mind? I think it's Cami. Let's take the back up. Yeah, let's go. Yeah, that one. Wonderful. Thank you. Just sharing again, what this is that every year, in collaboration with the Utah Data Research Center, or UDRC, each agency that participates in UDRC, if we want to scroll over to the history, you can see where this comes from, is the Utah Data Research Center was created in 2017 with the passage of Senate Bill 194. And it incorporates the data sharing agreement from USHE, or Utah System of Higher Ed, and the technical colleges, which at the time were separate, which are now incorporated into the same agency, the Utah State Board of Education, the Utah Department of Health, which is the early childhood group, and also the Department of Workforce Services. And so this puts together what is called the P20 pipeline, or it's your P20 SLDS, statewide longitudinal data system. Every year, the UDRC, Utah Data Research Center, puts together a research agenda items come from each of these partner agencies. So each agency submits their priorities of research. Those priorities are put together, and then the UDRC board goes through and prioritizes that list that they'll be working on in an upcoming year. And so we're requesting the board to review, and if we go back up to the top, priorities that we would like to suggest for UDRC to take into consideration as top priorities for their research moving forward. So, and in addition to this, these line up fairly closely to what ULEAD has also presented. So education loss and recovery efforts due to the COVID pandemic, and including impact of pandemic student learning and education programs. We're looking at attendance and learning strategies, really looking at strategic engagement using technology, looking at teacher and educator job satisfaction, mental and social well-being through academic learning programs, and finally, the impact of personalized competency-based learning. So I'm here to answer any questions. We don't have a number of, which one's the highest priority or not, because the highest ranking one is really done by the UDRC board as they put those. We could do a highest priority if we wanted, but again, here's the list that was assembled of things that we felt important, again, presenting this for your consideration.
Thank you. Any questions, committee members? Vice Chair Davis.
Yeah, how does the UDRC get the data, or are we part of the research center and we come with, our employees come with our own data? We're not giving them to another agency, or is this like just a data sharing agreement that we do with other agencies?
Chair Norton, do you mind if I answer?
I would appreciate that. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you for the question. So again, this was established as a state agency, well, not agency, a cooperative agency in 2017. So the way the data are shared is each of the cooperating agencies, again, put within laws saying you'll cooperate with this. We have a secure upload into the system, and then it goes through a matching algorithm between each system. Once it has gone through, then the UDRC drops all personally identifiable information and reassigns an internal ID for each of those data elements, particularly for students, for teachers, for college students, for workforce and such. So the data are shared through it's a secure transfer that we give to them once a year. And that, again, this is governed by an interagency agreement between each of the agencies and UDRC. So that's how the data are shared.
Okay, and it's required by law?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, committee members, seeing no other questions, we're ready for a motion.
Well, I better do my part.
Hey, thank you.
I move that the Finance Committee recommends that the board approve the UDRC research agenda priorities.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
No, it's been spoke to well.
Okay, any questions, board members, discussion? Go ahead, Vice Chair Davis.
I'll speak to it for a minute. I understand that lots of agencies are bringing ideas to the table and that these may not be picked up, but quite frankly, these are all the areas that a lot of research folks are working on right now. So, I mean, it stands to reason that these would be moved forward.
Thank you. Member Straight.
So this was required by law, but our discussion regarding University of Utah new lead, that's a different animal. Am I understanding that right?
Dr.
If I
Brown?
may. Yes, related, obviously, because it's based upon, research priorities, but yes, very much a different animal.
Chair Moss.
I was just going to say that my understanding is ULEAD might tap into some of this research, but ULEAD itself has the sort of case study focus where this does broad research on these priorities.
And if I may,
Yes, sir.
yes, UDRC actually has its own research staff, where again, ULEAD can absolutely, and they have tapped into the work that UDRC has done in the past, and actually partner with some of the findings for looking for outliers, on best practices and such. So yeah, there's definitely a collaboration between ULEAD, UDRC, and with universities and such what's going on. But primarily for this research agenda items, when the overall agenda is set for the year, then it's the UDRC staff, the research staff, then start working on those.
Okay, seeing no other hands, board members, would you please go ahead and vote? Vice Chair Davis, I'm not seeing your vote.
Sorry, I put it up there. It just,
Okay.
it's not a clicked it all the way.
Okay, it looks like that motion passes 4-1 with committee member Bogus in opposition. All right, our next action item comes to us from yesterday's board meeting. We have a request to select one of our committee members to be the representative from finance on the social studies RFP. Vice Chair Davis.
I should have talked to you before the meeting. But is it something you would be willing to do? You are the only one on our board teaching in the K-6 social studies space right now. So I think your voice would be invaluable, but if it's too much, I totally understand. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot publicly. I really should have asked ahead of time, but I would nominate you.
Well, I appreciate that. It is not something that I could take on at this time, especially on the timeline that they're on. With being away from my class for regular board responsibilities plus legislative responsibilities, I need to be with my students. If that would, I hope that you understand that.
Sure.
I would I would feel like that after having spent a year on the topic and a social studies educator himself, that committee member Straight would be an excellent choice.
Agree.
Committee member Bogus.
I just had a couple questions. One was, we talked about single meetings, but what time of day are these meetings held? How long are they? I think that before we start entertaining who's going to take this on, maybe we
Kristen,
need to
It's a
understand.
brand new process, and that information is not, they're just kind of gone into it blindly. We've never done this before in this kind of a motion, and they're just gonna, work till they get the work done.
It's
That's
typically
quick.
done during work hours, 8 to 5.
Okay, thank you.
Superintendent Jacobson.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly just remind everyone that coming out of board meeting yesterday, this is no longer an RFP. It's a competitive grant. And then based on to address committee member Bogus's question, I would imagine that once the committee members are identified, it will be up to the committee to come together and make those decisions on timing of day, how many meetings they're going to need to have, and come up with the baseline parameters. So I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
Vice Chair Davis.
Oh, sorry. I need to move my hand, but I agree. I think that having been a social studies educator, Brent would be a great choice as well.
With that being said, committee member Straight, would you be open to accepting that if elected?
Yes, I would do that.
Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that. Chair Moss, thank you.
I was just gonna second or third that, so.
Okay.
Nice. That.
Okay. So at this point, we have one candidate identified. Are there any others? Okay, I recommend that the committee select member Brent Straight to sit on the grant, the competitive grant social studies committee. Is that correct? Superintendent Jacobson?
I apologize. Can you repeat that?
I said that the committee selects Brent Straight to sit on the competitive grant social studies committee.
That is correct.
Okay, all right. All in favor, please vote. Okay, looks like that's unanimous. Thank you very much, committee. Okay, next item on our agenda would be the recognition of progress, achievements, and improvements. And I am guessing that Superintendent Jacobson, you're going to take that one.
Yes, thank you. So this again is a perpetual item that we always have on here. In here, you'll always find the PMR for our USIMS project that is reported on in detail every quarter, which you received last month for that particular one, but it will always be in backup. This month, we wanted to add the Utah grants in detail. And so we've got our grant administrator on hand to give that detail to you today.
Wonderful.
Hi, this is Rebecca. Can you see me and hear me okay?
I can, yes. Thanks, Rebecca.
Perfect. I'm going to pull up a presentation. Oh, wait, I will need you to stop sharing so that I can share a presentation.
Okay. And Rebecca, will you identify your name and your title?
Of course, Rebecca Nelson. I'm the Grant System Administrator for the Utah State Board of Education.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm a little bit disjointed today. I have to admit, I'm calling you from Bryce Canyon today.
Wonderful.
And it's just as cold here as it is everywhere else, but it's also beautiful. So, okay, thank you for having me. I've been asked to present on the Utah grants management system today. And as this is, there are a few new members of the committee, I've been asked to give a little bit of background and history and kind of some baseline information on what Utah Grants is and kind of the direction that we are going. So our agenda today includes an overview of the Utah Grant system, some interesting metrics, some history and timeline, upcoming enhancements, and the financial aspects of the program. And feel free to interrupt me at any time with any questions or comments. Okay, so here, Utah Grants is the Utah State Board of Education's electronic grants management system. Utah Grants was procured as a state contract in 2017, and we participated in the design, implementation, customization process with implementation in July of 2018 with fiscal year 2019 grant programs. Before the implementation of Utah Grants, USBE utilized a lot of different tools, including the UCA or Utah Consolidated Application. We issued award letters as PDF documents. We sent a lot of information back and forth through email. We tracked grants on an Excel document or a Word document or a Google form, and it was chaos. We needed a system that was integrated with our financial system, with FiNet, which is the state financial system. We needed a system that was cohesive across the agency and across sections. And the key component is that it needed to be compliant. We had some issues with overspending on some money and also some audit findings that we needed to make sure that we were addressing. So having the Utah Grant system was designed to implement a global system that would address each of those concerns. We are fully integrated with the state financial system, the FiNet. Transparency meaning that we use the same system LEAs. So our LEAs log in, most of you know, or have logins yourself. And it includes all grant programs through the USBE with the exception of our child nutrition programs, which go through CNP Web. All right, you're out of page down. Utah Grants is a life cycle management tool. So it takes a grant from cradle to grave. So essentially we're going through the entire life cycle from planning through announcements, applications, reviewing applications, issuing compliant award letters, and then post-award management of the grant, including reimbursement requests, site visits or monitoring, risk assessments. We've also added some audit functionality within the system, and we manage assurances within the system as well. Okay, Utah Grants is procured as a vendor contract. REI Systems Inc. is our contractor. And they distribute a product by the name of GovGrants. So you may have heard of the system or use the term GovGrants. Utah has branded GovGrants as Utah Grants. So it's the same thing. If you hear GovGrants, it is Utah Grants, but Utah Grants is our version. It is a cloud-based system, so we can access it anywhere, and it operates on a Salesforce platform. And then USBE has partnered very closely with our vendor REI to customize the product specifically for USBE's needs. And again, all flow through transactions. So all grant funds that are going from USBE, with the exception of CNP, are flowing through the Utah grant system. So that would include our MSP programs. So anything, even if it doesn't require an application, if there's a payment involved, it will go through Utah Grants, with the exception of vendor contracts. We do not handle vendor contracts. Grant funds we do. Let's go back. Okay, moving on to a couple of interesting metrics. Thought it was interesting to see the number of grants that we processed over the years. So the 4 years that we have history of, 2019 through 2022, the number of grants that we have been processing through the Utah Grants system has increased steadily each year, with 2022 being a total of 2,570 grant awards to our LEAs and our community-based organizations. The state MSP, these grants are kind of our automatic grants. So some of our MSP grants are not automatic, but when I refer to MSP within the Utah Grant system, I usually mean not basic related to basic. I mean automated payments and automated process. The payments are going directly to our LEAs without any application or intervention. So those awards are a little bit easier for us to handle. In fact, they're much easier for us to handle. That's part of the customization that we picked up with the Utah Grants branding, is being able to automate those MSP awards and payments. The next metric that is interesting is the number of payments that are processed through the system. So this would include our 1/12 payments by program for the MSP automated batches, as well as federal reimbursements and state reimbursements. So in 2022, we processed 44,000 reimbursement or payments through Utah Grants. And again, those are all integrated directly with FiNet. So the payments are actually going directly out of our state financial system. But the source record, the documented record, is Utah Grants. Okay, a little bit of history and timeline. So in 2018 and 2019, we were working really closely with REI and our developers to design and develop the system. We mapped the system to our financial system so that we had an API or an interface with FiNet, so that there didn't need to be manual interventions there. We made sure all of our data was loaded, all of our LEAs could get logged in. We had all of the LEAs set up and USBE users set up. We also handled the MSP automation and 1/12 payment processing and fully implemented the system. In 2022, we started diving into some, Brent, please.
You know what, I'm probably early on this, but I remember you gave a report in reports and requirements.
Yes.
And I know you pointed out then some of the improvements, but we also had a presentation from the field from a charter school. Were there any things there that were implemented as a result of that, or?
Specifically with charter schools?
No, they were just talking about the system and how it was functioning. They thought, well, one of the things they would like it to automatically repopulate the information, that when they do another grant, that their information is already populated in the system.
Right.
That rings a bell to you?
We're hearing some of that feedback, and actually I will get to that as we're talking about what we're currently working on and what's coming up in the future. Yes, I will get to that piece. Let me just quickly go through. I don't, you guys can read these just as easily as I can. Just maybe to point out the most recent things in 2022, we worked on COVID use cases as a response to some of the COVID reporting that we were required to do, as well as, sorry, I was covering my screen. Oh, updates to our Title I forms. We move on to what we're doing now to respond to your questions. Okay, so we have received a lot of feedback from various different groups. Our BA group, our charter schools, the reporting and requirements committee, task force. So some of the things that are coming up address those concerns. Others are within USBE, some of our own requirements that we've needed things to be updated. And then we also have a lot that is planned and forthcoming, and we'll talk about that in the financials too, as far as we have some budget that we can still ask our vendor to continue to support us in that. So a few things that we have done internally that the LEAs don't see. We've added some functionality to be able to talk better with our financial system. We needed to add a bank code to do that. We've completed that. We needed to be able to change some ownership of people that left the Board of Education. Records are still associated with them. We needed to be able to change those on the fly. And then we needed to be able to better see the application revisions within the system. We received some LEA feedback on specifically from the BA group that we needed to view active awards, some different information within the active awards flex table. I'm going to actually show you what we've done with that because that change has been made. And then they also required some additional fields on their reports, and that has also been done. What we are working on right now is we have replaced our API interface. We were utilizing MuleSoft for our API with FiNet. We replaced that, and the state helped us to build a custom build API. There's still a couple little quirks with that we have to manually push a couple of transactions. So that's still an open ticket, although 99% of transactions are flowing through that new API smoothly. So it's still open until we get that 1%. And then we are making sure that our award approval tasks, again, this is an internal task, our tasks are clear when they come to us for approval. Another LEA feedback item, and this one actually came from the task force, was being able to view all of the fields that are needed on the application. I'm going to show you those screens. And then there's also application links within the application. I'm going to show you those screens as well. Additional things that we're working on are more feedback from the reporting and requirements task force, expanding training both internally and externally. We have a lot of new users on both ends. And then we're also planning, we're looking at a planning tool. REI we're just in the demonstration phases right now, but we're looking at a consolidated application tool, which would combine multiple applications into one, reducing LEA burden. What we're seeing from that, it looks really promising, but we're still really on the early stages of discovery with that. So let me show you what the changes we have made, and then I'll follow up and see if that addresses some of the concerns that were brought up in the committee, or if there's specific things you'd like us to continue to work on. Okay, so based on the BA user group feedback, there was a lot of information on this screen. This is their grant screen. It shows all of their grants throughout all time. just to note, we are also working on closing out prior year grants so that you're only seeing the most active programs here. So you don't have to go through so much detail. But there were too many fields here, and a lot of the fields contained just random numbers that nobody knew what they were. So we got rid of those and we added 2 important fields that the LEAs felt were useful. That would be the CFDA number and the sub account. So they can now see that on the fly. Those were the same fields that they requested to be added to some reports. And having these fields available to the LEAs helps them to be able to crosswalk a roadmap between our system and their system, or our accounting codes and their accounting codes, much easier. So they can view this and kind of make that map really quite seamless. Why we didn't have those before, we have them now. I'm really glad because I think that's going to be really helpful to them. Another enhancement, this one came from the task force. We found out through the task force actually that we can't see all of the things that we need to see or do all of the things that we need to do in the application, specifically as it relates to seeing those requirements in the application. Before the enhancement, you had to click on a hyperlink to get to another screen to view the description of what this program even is, or if it has requirements or include attachments or anything about the application. Now we have actually moved that section directly onto the application itself so that you don't have to know or remember to follow a hyperlink to get to the detail. The detail is just automatically there. And the second thing that we did here is we added a function that we can now add links to the attachment section of the application. So if we want to link you somewhere, like for example, a Qualtrics survey or a Google Doc form or a federal website, we can link you anywhere. And we're of the opinion that we can still utilize Qualtrics surveys, Google Doc forms, some of those things that our team still needs to collect data on. But all of that information, all of those links, all of the requirements for the application will be contained within the application. And that was the ask of the task force. Representative Straight, did you have a question?
Wow, you just
Board member Straight, you're promoted.
That's great. I so appreciate this. Such a professional job, such a great presentation. I should have kept my question.
Thank you. Okay, so that goes through the enhancements and functionality that we have been working on. Were there other things that you wanted to address specifically right now, or yes?
Looks like Chair Moss has got a question.
Thank you, Chair Moss.
Just a comment. I just want to say thank you. That reports and requirements task force that actually a majority of this committee has been involved in has really appreciated the responsiveness as we sort of rolled this into that discussion. So just thanks. I know we're going to have ongoing discussion about this item, but really appreciate the quick responsiveness to those expressions of, requests and changes from the field. So we'll keep talking, but thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Davis.
Yeah, I would just echo Chair Moss's words. And also, we hear from time to time, they want to do more. They want to access their survey links. They want everything put into this system. And sometimes we hear, but it can be a little hard to navigate at times. But what I've really heard, and I didn't know this, that this is one of the best in the nation. And that we have created a system where it's more transparent and more, the information is more readily available for people, and that other states are actually coming to us to ask us how we did this and how we make this happen. And I think that's important to note, if any of the public is listening, that this really is an important piece of what we're doing to maintain communication and transparency. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. And if I may, we actually receive a lot of accolades as it relates to handling of our COVID funds through this Utah grant system. We were able to respond very quickly with the requirements and handling of the COVID funds through the Utah grant system, and we've received accolades for that too. So thank you. Moving on, I believe this is my last slide, just a quick snapshot of kind of what we have spent on the system, what we still have set aside. So over the course of the life of the project, we have spent just over 4.5 million, and that would include both development costs and licensing costs. We have not yet been invoiced for services in 2023, but expect those to be up to, hold on, let me look at that concept price again. It could be as high as 525,000 this year if we include all of the money that we've set aside for development. We're approaching, past midway through the year. We probably won't get that high, but that's what we have set aside for this year. And that's it. So if there were any other questions.
I don't see any, but that was a wonderful report and a wonderful program. And it's just awesome what you are doing. Thank you so much for making this entity look good in our state as well. And most importantly, for serving and supporting those LEAs out there as they, helping them correctly and safely dealing with all this funding. Appreciate your work.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Superintendent Jacobson, does that conclude this information item?
It does.
Okay, I wanted to just, while we're on recognition of achievements, I wanted to pass along my sincere thanks for the tremendous job that the finance staff has done this legislative session, last night's marathon meeting. You're rock stars, as I said last night, and I firmly believe that it is amazing to see how amazing, just wonderful our finance staff is. And this is kind of, I'm, shooting from the hip, but it just hit me last night driving home, how amazing you all are in your positions. But more importantly, in the way you handle yourself and your professionalism and your honesty and integrity. And we are so fortunate to have just, the leaders of the state in finance right here with us right now. So, well, I guess Superintendent Jones isn't here, but we'll include him too, I guess. Anyway, thank you all so very much. All right, our next agenda item is the indirect cost pool proposal review.
Yes, and if we can recognize Assistant Finance Director Sue Mack.
Great, thank you, Sue. Welcome.
Thank you.
This is an information item that we're bringing to you every year. We submit a proposal to our to the U.S. Department of Education. And this is a mechanism that we utilize to fairly determine an equitable cost of our administrative cost to each individual program. It's a way for us to capture some of those federal costs. So if Sue can give you the background, her process, the timelines on these negotiations that she goes through every year. So Sue.
Right.
Yeah, sure. So at the end of each year, calendar year, so I go through the calculation, the proposal to using fiscal year, last year, fiscal year's data to project it out, the indirect cost rates for the upcoming year. Then I usually submit the proposal as for them to review and approve, negotiate, and then usually by the end of June, we will get the approved rates back. And so we can use for the upcoming fiscal year. So this year, we just submitted proposal for the rates for unrestricted rates is 19.9, which is similar to last year, and then in the restricted 10.5%. And do you have any questions so far?
I did have a question in the backup. There towards the back of the backup, there was a page titled "Fixed with Carry Forward Computation," and it's on the restricted page. Down at the bottom, so it's under letter C. It makes it there's a title there that says "should have received," and then it's actual indirect costs for 2022 and 24. Can you explain that "should have received"?
Can you which tab again? That
It's under the title of the chart is "Fixed with Carry Forward Computation." So it's down towards the bottom where all the numbers are.
So let's see, she can pull up the.
Do you know which file we're looking at, Sue?
I am not sure. Is that in the submission? Utah SEA submission tab? Is that what did you?
The front page of this section was the general accounting policies.
Also, it's cost policy statement.
And then there was a page in there that Superintendent Jones had signed, yes, and then it went there was a certification of indirect costs, and then the last one was 2 pages of the computations.
Oh, is it which tab is carry forward schedule unrestricted? Is it? I think.
Let me just look. I printed it, so I'm sorry. And Vice Chair Davis, since you got a question, you can go ahead and ask that, and I'll find out which tab this was.
Well, I'm about to show you how very new I am to the Finance Committee. I'm going to ask a question that's probably obvious to everybody else. I know when we calculate the indirect costs, these are all for administration of federal programs, correct? And why do we break out costs as restricted? Aren't all the federal dollars restricted? Are there any unrestricted federal dollars? And what are, I mean, that's interesting to me.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for the questions. Most of the federal grants are under restricted rates, but however, we do have some program like CNP, Child Nutrition Program. We can charge unrestricted rates. And most of our state program that we charge unrestricted rates.
Okay.
So
and the unrestricted rates are more or less than the
usually unrestricted is higher. Restricted because federal government will have certain restriction like superintendency, like Superintendent Dixon's and certain, and they would not allow us. We have to take it out. Some of them, they had certain restrictions that for the feds that we cannot increase certain costs for.
Okay. It feels counterintuitive to me because restricted funds seem like they're harder to administer than unrestricted funds. And yet we can only charge less for the harder things to administer. And this is, a point of privilege. I shouldn't even be giving this narrative in this meeting, taking everyone's time. I apologize. I'll stop now.
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
Superintendent Jacobson.
Yeah, just to expand on that a little bit and hopefully give a little more clarity. When we negotiate these rates, there are certain costs that the federal government does not recognize as being eligible to be paid to be part of the rate. And so therefore they determine a restricted rate and an unrestricted rate. So the restricted rate can only be charged against the federal grants from the Department of Education. There are grants from other federal agencies like the Department of Agriculture that the rate was not negotiated with the Department of Agriculture, therefore we can charge the unrestricted rate. And then of course, all of our state funding falls under the unrestricted rate.
Chair, are you still
kind of
looking for your thing? Can I ask another question or no?
And you know what, yes, you can. I'm gonna take mine offline. I'm sure nobody else even could be wanting to know about this, so I'll just follow up with finance later. So yes, go ahead with
Well,
yours.
nobody probably cares about this conversation either. I
Yes,
was
we
just
do.
doing it because you were searching, but
Restricted and unrestricted, that definition is so important. So that's wonderful.
this is another bird walk, and I'm just why do we have to negotiate every year? Why can't you would think that the federal government could just create formulas that we could just plug in. I mean, but feels like we're negotiating with them every year for our rates to pay for these indirect costs. And this is probably just an opinion again. And anyway.
Yeah. That, because the things change rules, and that's part of the requirements that we negotiate every year.
I would agree, and especially when people's jobs sometimes are heavily impacted, or our budget is for those jobs, but how it falls in there, it's challenging. Okay, any other questions on this?
I'll just say our state somehow finds a way to make it a consistent amount.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, enough said. Sorry.
Good. All right, and our final item on our agenda is request for data and information. Superintendent Jacobson, do you have any information you'd like to lead off with on this?
This is just, if I remember correctly, this was a request by Board Member Bogus on the data sharing agreements by agency.
Okay.
So it is in backups. I don't know if you have any questions. We've got Director Bruff here, and then I believe Assistant Superintendent Voorhees was going to jump back on if you have any questions.
All right. Go ahead, Member Bogus.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a question, and I appreciate you guys had emailed this to me earlier, so thank you very, very much. I did have a question about why we have 9 separate data sharing agreements with Workforce Services.
Sure. This is Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. Would you like me to speak to that?
I would love you to speak to that, Katie. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I hope it's okay if I leave my camera off. I'm not feeling well today.
Uh-oh. Yes, get better. And thanks for being here.
Oh, no problem. It's easy when it's digital. Well, yeah, Board Member Bogus, you bring up or committee member, excuse me. You bring up a really good point about the number of agreements. The reason that there are so many agreements with Division of Workforce or Department of Workforce Services is because, first of all, DWS is a very big agency, so there are lots of little things going on there. Also, it's important that we, in our agreements, that we clearly specify the purpose for which we're sharing data. So each of those agreements is not necessarily indicative that we're sharing. Well, I don't know. Maybe that was my unwell brain trying to see. I'm going to stop that sentence. But it is the case that each of those agreements specifies specifically the purpose and specify specifically the data elements that will be shared. Does that
May I
answer the
follow,
question?
may I follow up, Chair?
You bet.
Thank you. So would it be a safe conclusion, as you answered my question, that we have 9 agreements for 9 different purposes with
Yes.
workforce services?
That's exactly right.
Do we know what those purposes are?
We do, except not off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to put that together if you'd like. I should also mention that I'm the one that compiled this list, and some of these agreements are no longer active. So
Okay.
if you're interested, I could compile an updated version of that designates which ones are currently in place versus like a historical data sharing that's no longer in place.
Okay. That I would love to look at that. I was also interested in the telehealth network and why we're engaging in data sharing with the telehealth network.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Oh, Chair, may I respond?
Yes, ma'am. Thanks.
Thank you. So and technically, I don't know that the Utah Education and Telehealth Network, which is typically called UETN, used to be known as UEN. I don't know that they'd actually be considered an agency, so I wasn't sure if I should include it on here or not, but I did. They're kind of a state partner. I'm not sure, Board Member Bogus, if you're familiar with them. Would you like would you like me to explain what UETN is?
I do know who they are. I know they run Cactus and all of that. Yeah, I think if you want to run over for the public, I think that's great. I think I have a pretty grounded understanding of UETN.
Okay.
But whatever you choose to do per the chair is fine with me. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just mention that actually Aaron is raising his hand. I wonder if he has a good explanation for this.
It looks like we should recognize Director Bruff. Go ahead.
If I may, thank you. Going over UETN, sorry, Utah Education Telehealth Network, sorry. One of the components that we do share with them is for the E-rate process. So they need to know what is the percent of the low-income students throughout the state at each of the LEAs, so they can apply for E-rate, which helps get basically access technology and Wi-Fi information into these schools, especially in rural environments. And so they need those numbers, basically that percentage of those numbers that we share with them, and we don't hide small n sizes with them. So that's one of the reasons why that agreement's in place, is so they can go there and have one accurate view of what's going on inside of there. And in Utah in particular, UETN administers the E-rate system, where the Board of Education doesn't do that. Other states, they don't have an agency like UETN, so a lot of times the education department runs that themselves. So that's one of the reasons why that agreement is in place.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, Chair, I was waiting for you. Thank you. I do have one final question, but I'm happy to hold off it and allow Member Davis to.
Okay, we'll have Vice Chair Davis, then we'll come back to you. Okay.
Oh,
Thank you.
I was saying I could wait. I was muted. I'll just go ahead. I saw a lot of these come through Law and Licensing Committee. So each one goes through a committee and then to the board to look at the parameters. And if I remember correctly, most all of these are de-identified data. And a lot of them will be like a PhD student from the university that's doing their dissertation on such and such. But I've never looked at this systemically, because I guess y'all were doing this over here in finance. Is there something that says that every data sharing agreement is renewed at so much time frame, or is every single one different?
Chair, I can speak to that if you'd like.
I would. Thank you.
There isn't necessarily a really consistent standard. The guidance we've received from the Attorney General's office is that an agreement should last no longer than 5 years before being revisited. So some of our data sharing agreements that are in place that are legally required, so we don't even really have the choice whether or not we share data. We still put a 5-year limit on those so that everyone can just kind of come back to the table. And aside from those, the length of time varies, especially when it comes to research, which, by the way, this document itself does not contain a whole lot of research data because they're agencies rather than individuals. But just for your information, when it comes to researchers, that's typically a much shorter time period, sometimes as short as 1 year, maybe up to 3 years. But it is somewhat arbitrary. Like we have like kind of an internal standard, but not well documented.
Yeah, but just hearing the 5 years, that's helpful. I didn't know that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, back to you, Board Member Bogus.
Thank you. I'm just wondering what, and again, maybe this is going to come out eventually. You said you were going to follow up and disaggregate this a little more. What are the 12 purposes for which we have data sharing agreements with the University of Utah?
Oh yeah, Chair, may I?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. There's a lot of those are through the Utah Education Policy Center, which is UEPC. And we have, they do a lot of education research and coordinate heavily with our agency for that. So I'd say probably, I don't know, I'd have to go back and look, but I'd say a big chunk of those, maybe half or 2/3 of those agreements are with the UEPC.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And go ahead, Director Brough.
Thank you. And just to add to that is a lot of times there is a requirement in different program evaluations that we have an external evaluator review that program. UEPC is one of the main entities that gets contracted to do that because they're so well integrated. When I say integrated, they have the professional staff available to do that. And so when you say 12, a lot of those you'll find will probably be the evaluation and an external evaluators process. And so that usually goes through either an RFP or some sort of process where a selection has happened and they enter into that agreement. And with that agreement, that contract, then that's why there are so many there, because each one of those have to be individually reviewed, checked, and agreed to.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Chalice.
Yeah, thanks. This is, sorry to just kind of volunteer myself, but something I thought the committee might find interesting is that data sharing agreements vary pretty heavily in the amount of data, the frequency of transferring that data, the method by which it's transferred. So one thing that's interesting here is there are some of these that are kind of like a constant data access where the best example of that is the colleges and universities are granted access to our to one of our technical systems so that they can query existing students to pull an SSID, for example. In contrast, some of these data sharing agreements are like maybe a once a year spreadsheet sent securely through a secure file transfer protocol. So it is a little deceiving too. I just wanted to mention that to the committee that one agreement is not necessarily the same in like intensity, I guess, as another. Quite a variation.
Thank you.
Hey, Vice Chair Davis.
I don't know. I'm getting, the more I'm learning, the more questions I have. So just to go back to Director Brough's comments. So a lot of these are initiated either by us as USBE or in law. We're asked to do certain things. We put out an RFP and these agencies get the RFP to do the research. And then the data sharing agreement ensues because they're doing work that either we initiated or the legislature has required us to do. Is that correct?
Chair, if I may.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. That is a correct statement. So there's a lot of work to be done. And not always, do we have the staff and the capability to do it, or it's just required that it has to be an external evaluator because of the way that program was written with the legislature. So hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you.
And go ahead, Director Chalice.
Thanks. I'm
Oh,
like,
I think I just gave you a promotion, didn't I? Sorry.
oh, no, I think you were right. Did you say director?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay.
Probably, I feel like I don't deserve that title, but yeah, that is my job title. Sorry, I don't know why I keep volunteering. I'm excited about a project, so I just wanted to mention this too, to Board Member Davis's comment that, you know, a lot of questions are coming up. As I've been in this position, one of the tasks I've been sort of working through is gaining a better understanding. We have a lot of data sharing documented, but I am personally trying to gain an understanding of the scope of those, the purpose of those, the history behind them. And I think I alluded to this in the full board meeting yesterday, but one of the projects that our team is working on is a tool to really enhance the transparency so that board members or the public could look at a certain data sharing agreement, see a quick overview of what is going on, what data is being shared, all publicly facing. So I'm excited about the project of helping myself and also you better understand what each of these data sharing agreements mean.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I agree.
Okay. Seeing no other hands, board members, I am looking for one final motion.
I would move to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye,
Hi.
Aye.
Great.
I's a pirate.
Okay, we have until 1 o'clock. So we got about 2 hours for a lovely brunch. And then we're back at 1 o'clock for USDB.
Thank you,
Thank
Chair.
you all.
Thanks.